It's only Jason Kenney's first week as Alberta's premier, but already he's making some waves. His first order of business, a threat to turn off the taps to BC. Today, though, he's taking on the federal government, and his beef is with a couple pieces of legislation, particularly the Liberals' proposed Environmental Assessment Bill. Officially, it's known as Bill C-69, a plan to overhaul how major resource projects like pipelines get approved in this country. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney calls it the No Pipeline Act. That's because the bill creates an Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, which will assess not just environmental considerations, but also health, social, and economic impacts, as well as the effect on Indigenous peoples. Critics fear that will add years to the review process. There will be time limits, but there are concerns Cabinet, and more specifically the Environment Minister, would have too much of an ability to stop and start the clock. Proponents of the bill say it adds certainty and clarity to the process, meaning approved projects won't face the very litigation that continues to challenge the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline.
TMX was first submitted to the National Energy Board in 2013. And today we are in 2019. It should have never come to this. It is an indictment on a system that left major resource projects vulnerable to legal challenges by failing to ensure Indigenous voices were heard and environmental concerns taken seriously.
Kenney, though, says the bill is unconstitutional and is threatening to challenge it in court. He's also threatening to challenge Bill C-48, which would limit oil tanker traffic off the northern coast of BC. Jason Kenney is the Premier of Alberta. He joins me now in studio. Hi, Mr. Kenney. Premier Kenney, nice to see you again.
Good to be here.
Thank you for coming in. So you're fresh off the meeting with the Prime Minister. How did it go?
I think quite well. We had a full and frank exchange. I, in particular, emphasized what I said to the Senate committee today, which is if Bill C-69, what we call the No More Pipelines law, passes in its current form, it will have a devastating impact on our future prosperity through creating even more investor uncertainty. But we also think it will injure national unity. It's a direct invasion of provincial jurisdiction in the Constitution, and I made it clear to the Prime Minister that we will challenge that in court should it pass through Parliament.
When you brought up the national unity argument, what was his response?
Well, I think the Prime Minister said he understands that there is a great deal of frustration in Alberta. I pointed out, imagine a federal government bringing in a bill to intrude into provincial jurisdiction to damage, let's say, the aviation sector in Quebec at a time when they have 50% support for separation, as a recent Angus Reid poll suggested is the case in Alberta. I said that would never happen. I said a federal government's first obligation is to maintain national unity, and right now that's being jeopardized. Albertans feel like we've done our part, paid massively into the rest of the Federation, played by the rules, but we can't get a fair shake. We're being kicked while we're down, and that's what C-48 and C-69 are about.
The argument that you made today in your testimony before the Senate committee was one, you would constitutionally challenge it, that it sort of flies in the face of what the province should have jurisdiction over. The feds say, though, there's a shared issue of jurisdiction, and one that they have some jurisdiction over, and that is interprovincial environmental impacts. Do they not have jurisdiction over that?
Yes, interprovincial, absolutely, and just like they do over interprovincial pipelines. But back in the 1981, when there was all the debates about the patriation of the Constitution, Peter Lougheed came down here and said, unless Alberta could get, or the provinces could get, a constitutional guarantee that they exclusively have jurisdiction over regulating the development of resources in their own provinces, including oil and gas, he would not sign the Constitution.
But what about the emissions derived from those resources?
Well, this is the question of emissions is a complex one, which is now before the Ontario and Saskatchewan appeal courts in the carbon tax references. But whether or not a province can permit, let's say, a bitumen project is clearly under a Section 92A, the exclusive jurisdiction of the province. So I think we have a very, very strong case if they decide to proceed with this bill. But I'm also very concerned about the economic impact. We've seen the flight of tens of billions of dollars of capital from Alberta's energy sector to the U.S. oil and gas sector.
How do you know that it's going to the U.S.? I remember going to the shale oil in Williston, North Dakota in 2012. It was already booming. Right. How do you know? Is there really a causal effect there where one left and one
there's been a 0.5% decline in oil and gas investment in Canada in the past 4 years and a 5.5% increase in the United States.
But it was already on the increase since 2009.
I'll give you one good example. In Canada, it was the largest market cap company in the TSX Their headquarters were in Calgary. They are now effectively headquartered in Denver, and they've moved the majority of their operations to the United States. This is happening over and over again. And I could go through a long list of companies. We're talking tens of billions of dollars. And that's why we have here's the thing. We have a jobs crisis in Alberta, 7% unemployment. They have full employment in Texas, Oklahoma, North Dakota, and Colorado with like 2% unemployment. Those are people hired by money that's moved south of the border. Not one no reduction in carbon emissions. The U.S. has doubled oil production in the past decade, but we're shooting ourselves in the foot here in Canada. It doesn't make sense.
I guess I just wonder if we know for sure that I'm not arguing that capital hasn't left the oil patch. It has, but has it directly gone to the United States? Do we know for sure, because of the regulatory environment there, that it's growing? I mean, it has been growing for a number of years, even during the Obama administration.
Sure. Look, there are plenty of studies that I think support this. And anybody in the energy sector will tell you that's the story of what's really been happening. The U.S. oil and gas sector is booming, but it is struggling. We just had a mid-sized gas company declare bankruptcy earlier this week. But here's the point. Bill C-69 creates yet more uncertainty at exactly the wrong time. And this is not just about Alberta, it's about Canada's shared prosperity.
Is there a point at which you would support an amended Bill C-69?
Well, we would prefer the government just kill the bill, but if they're going to amend it, we would ask that they include all of the amendments proposed by the Government of Alberta to protect provincial jurisdiction, and then all of the amendments proposed by the Energy Pipeline Association and the Association of Petroleum Producers to create the necessary investor certainty. With those amendments, which is basically rewriting the bill, we would support it.
And if they don't do that, what happens?
If they don't do that, we will immediately launch a constitutional challenge of this bill as a clear violation of provincial jurisdiction.
What about the threat that you made during the campaign that should TMX not proceed and should Bill C-69 proceed, you would have a referendum on equalization?
Yes, and I repeated that to the Senate panel today, and I believe I mentioned this to the Prime Minister, which is to say that if we cannot get a coastal pipeline built and the withdrawal of bills like C-69 or massively amended version of it, then we would be prepared to trigger a constitutional referendum on Section 36 of the Constitution, that's equalization. We would do so in October of 2021, concurrent with our next municipal elections. So we're not rushing to that. I've always said that shouldn't be our first resort, it should be our last resort. And we understand that doesn't actually change equalization, but what it does is to assert our request for fairness to the top of the national agenda, learning from the success of Quebec in how they've asserted their interests in recent decades.
What the feds are saying with Bill C-69 is, at least the premise that they have articulated why they think the bill is needed, is the current system wasn't working. Like what was already in existence, if we want more certainty, if companies want more certainty, they are aiming to provide it with this bill.
Well, we disagree. I mean, during the tenure of the Harper government, 4 major pipelines were approved.
No major ones to Tidewater. I know Anchor Loop, where there's a bit of it twin, but it wasn't major.
Well, there were 4 major pipelines that were approved and commissioned, constructed, that increased oil takeaway from Alberta by 1.72 million barrels per day, doubling oil shipment capacity in Canada. It's true none went to the coast because none had been, the only one that came to the federal cabinet when Prime Minister Harper there was Northern Gateway. It was approved. Prime Minister Trudeau canceled that. He surrendered to Obama's...
That was over a year after it was approved. You were still in government for a year after it was approved.
Well, it was approved. It's true, subject to further judicial scrutiny. But if the Prime Minister had remedied done additional Aboriginal consultation after that and gone ahead and it would be done by now. And he killed Energy East with new regulations, surrendered to Obama's veto on Keystone. Well, they withdrew because of regulatory uncertainty. Look, the point is, the bottom line is, the world production of oil has grown by 10% in the past decade. It's doubled in the United States. These foreign-funded interest groups that are behind C-48, C-69, the killing of Northern Gateway, the killing of Energy East, the bungling of Trans Mountain, they aren't doing anything to stop a single barrel of oil from being produced or shipped out of Venezuela, the United States, OPEC, or Russia. Why should we as Canadians, with the highest standards on earth, be the only ones to bear the brunt of this campaign?
I get what you're saying completely about other areas and the lack of regulation around them. them. But how do you know, for example, it's foreign-funded interests behind Bill C-69? I mean, the government is vocally advocating for it as well. Are you saying that the government is forced into this by foreign-funded
that the
organizations?
Chief of Staff to Minister McKenna worked for years for the Pembina Institute, which received money from the tar sands campaign.
The Chief of Staff to Jim Carr, Janet Ainsley, used to work for CAP.
And the Jerry Butts worked for the World Wildlife Fund, which received money from the tar sands campaign. And they're getting what they want. They're getting what they want, which is landlocking our energy.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you,
Thanks,
Premier
Vassy.
Kenney. Great to see you.
All the best.
Appreciate it. So what's the federal government's response to Alberta's legal threat? Amarjeet Sohi is the Federal Minister of Natural Resources, and he joins us now from the foyer of the House of Commons. Hi, Minister Sohi. Great to see you again. Thanks for your time.
Nice to be with you, Ashi.
Premier Jason Kenney says that your government is contravening the Constitution and Alberta's own jurisdiction over its resources with Bill C-69. Are you confident that Bill C-69 in its current form would hold up in court?
Well, Vashi, we have been very clear from day one that the scope of Bill C-69 is to capture large infrastructure projects that have a significant impact on the environment and that are within the federal jurisdiction and federal area of responsibility. So we are very confident that the work that we have done so far in consultations and through the parliamentary committee, as well as the work that is being done by senators now, and we will be in a very good position to ensure that good projects move forward in the right way so we can get our resources continue to be developed.
Let me ask you about the work that the senators are doing. They're talking quite a bit about the possibility of amendments and a big number of amendments. Is there a chance that if the amendments are so great that they require more debate, obviously in the House, that this bill will not pass by the end of the sitting?
Well, as you know, we were, Minister McKenna, myself, and Minister Garneau were in front of the Senate committee answering senators' questions. We made it clear that we are open to amendments that will strengthen this piece of legislation, which is very important for us to actually pass in order to give certainty to investors and move forward on energy development and other projects. But we look forward to the work that senators would do. I understand that soon they will start going clause to clause analysis of the legislation, and we look forward to continue to working with them on it.
You say you look forward to passing the bill. Does that mean that you guarantee it will pass in this sitting?
It is our goal to ensure that this piece of legislation passes before the House rises. But again, it is in front of the Senate, and Senate has a process that they need to follow. But at the end of the day, actually, we want to make sure that we are able in this country to build large infrastructure projects. And as you would many times we have this conversation about the current system is not working. The current system that we have in place is actually failing our energy sector, is failing our energy sector workers, is having a huge impact on communities because we have not been able to build projects such as pipelines to get our resources to global markets.
The problem with respect, Minister, is though that the system that you are proposing, that this bill proposes to replace the current one, even if you accept the argument that it's not working, and I understand the point you're making there, the system that you're proposing will replace it is being criticized not just by Jason Kenney, but by members of the industry who are saying it will do the exact opposite of what you're saying it will, that it will create uncertainty at a time when they least need it.
We respectfully disagree with some of the criticism of this legislation. We are confident that having a process that allows us to restore the trust of Canadians, that allow us to involve Indigenous Canadians in the decision-making process, that allows early consultation to take place, that where we can identify many of the issues that actually give pose challenges on projects later on. So that early engagement part and the ability of Canadians to participate in the process help us restore and gain the confidence of Canadians for large energy infrastructure projects.
And I understand the argument that you're making, and you may believe that, but there is a large constituency of people, of companies, of politicians in your home province who believe otherwise. And I think the point that Jason Kenney made in committee today was an interesting one. You know, he brought up obviously the issue of national unity. He said if this was Quebec and there was the same level of support in Quebec as there is for separation as there appears to exist according to one poll in Alberta, the federal government would never introduce something like this. That that say Quebec's main industry said it would undermine them, that it would create uncertainty at the worst possible time. Would the federal government go forward with a bill like that if it was Quebec and not Alberta? What do you think of that point?
I think linking the anxiety and frustration that Alberta workers and families have been facing over the last number of years because of the downturn in the energy sector, and linking that to Bill C-69, in my mind, is not the appropriate linkage, because because it is not. Because
they're anxious and they're upset because of what's happened in the oil patch.
But the bill, it has nothing to do with Bill C-69. Bill C-69 is not even in effect yet, right? So I think
but they're saying when it does, it will be worse.
It will not. This is the thing. We disagree with those critics. Bill C-69 actually allows good projects to move forward faster. It allows the timelines to be shorter. It allows Indigenous communities to be involved. It allows us to look at the impact of those projects on the environment, which helps us gain confidence of Canadians. So this is a piece of legislation that we have consulted for 2 years with industry, with stakeholders, with environmental organization, with many Canadians. I think we believe that this bill actually does more to get our resources to global markets than the previous government's efforts have ever produced any results.
Speaking of getting resources to other markets, really quickly before I let you go, I just wanted to ask you, I've heard two different things from your government on a timeline for TMX. A release stated a decision would be made by Cabinet by June 18th. You have said in an interview after that there are no guarantees of approval before the next election. Which is it?
What I said, Vashi, was that the question was posed to me whether I can guarantee June 18th to be the date. What I said was ultimately it's a cabinet decision, and our goal is to ensure that cabinet is able to make that decision by June 18th.
I'm not clear though. Does that mean that cabinet will make a decision by June 18th?
That the way consultations are going, and we have issued a draft accommodation and consultation report for Indigenous communities to consider. That report has been shared with Indigenous communities last week. Currently, they're studying them and commenting on that report, and we will continue our consultation parallel to that. The way things are going, we are I'm very hopeful that a decision can be made by Cabinet by June 18th on this particular project.
Okay, Minister Sohi, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time.
No, thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to welcome Jason Kenney, Premier of Alberta, to Ottawa. An opportunity for us to talk about the many things that we agree on. I'm sure we'll talk about a few things we disagree on as well, but we agree on the need to create jobs in Alberta and across the country, support our ability to get our resources to new markets safely, sustainably.
Thanks very much for receiving me, Prime Minister, just in, I think, 3 days into my own premiership. And of course, you and I worked together before here in Parliament. As you know, Albertans are going through a period of sustained economic adversity, and we all need to work together to turn that around, to restore investor confidence. And I hope that we can have an honest conversation about that.
A friendly exchange between Alberta Premier Jason Kenney and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau earlier today. The two met for the first time since Kenney became Premier. He was in Ottawa to make his case to the Senate and to the Prime Minister to kill Bill C-69. That's the bill that wants to overhaul the way resource projects are approved. I asked Premier Kenney earlier if there was any version of the bill he would accept. Take a listen.
We would prefer the government just kill the bill, but if they're going to amend it, we would ask that they include all of the amendments proposed by the Government of Alberta to protect provincial jurisdiction, and then all of the amendments proposed by the Energy Pipeline Association and the Association of Petroleum Producers to create the necessary investor certainty. With those amendments, which is basically rewriting the bill, we would support it.
So how likely are those amendments and recommendations to be made to the bill? And what about Kenney's threat to hold a referendum on equalization if no changes are made and no pipeline gets built? It's time for the Power Panel. In Calgary, journalist Jen Gerson. Tim Murphy of Macmillan Vantage is in Toronto, along with former Saskatchewan Finance Minister Andrew Thompson, who's now the Chief of Government Relations for University of Toronto. And here with me in studio, Hill and Knowlton Strategies' Melissa Lantzman. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Melissa, I'll start with you. Pleasure to have you here in studio. So we were just watching that exchange with the new besties, Justin Trudeau and Jason Kenney.
Yeah, that's quite something.
It is. I was hearkening back to the before Jason Kenney even said, I think he was running when he said something along the lines of Justin Trudeau has the depth of a finger bowl, and there were lots of insults that were traded. It seemed like Jason Kenney was running against Justin Trudeau in the provincial election, but lo and behold, things change.
Certainly so. Things often change when two officials are speaking to each other. I think the conversation is much different in public than it will be in private. I think you've seen Premier Kenney now come at it sort of full throttle. He's going to challenge everything. He's going to go to court. He's going to speak every time there's a bill, and he's got a 55% sort of voter turn, or I guess votes in his favor with a 70% voter turnout. So he certainly has the mandate to do it. And he's doing exactly what Albertans asked him to do.
What do you think, Jen, the chances of his argument, and it's an argument that against Bill C-69, for example, it's an argument that's been echoed by many others who have appeared before the Senate. What do you think the chances of those arguments actually impacting the final result of the bill or the outcome of this whole thing are?
Well, I think there are good odds that parts of this bill will be amended. I mean, I think it should be noted that it's not just Kenney and his supporters who have raised some serious red flags about this bill. Notley raised a lot of the same kinds of red flags. There are people within the industry and outside the industry, people all over the political spectrum who have pointed out.
Quebec, other provinces.
Yeah, exactly. Who've pointed out that there's a lot of incredibly vague language in this bill that will almost certainly stall any kind of potential project and not just pipelines, and subject it to unnecessary legal challenges. The real sin of the bill is that it further entrenches a lot of these projects into a political decision-making process as opposed to an administrative decision-making process. And if one of the big sins of the Harper government was to subject NEB approvals to cabinet, this bill only makes that worse. Further politicizing this whole system, is exactly the opposite direction that I think most people, both environmentalists and the industry, want to go. There are a lot of very legitimate concerns and problems. And from what I've heard in the Senate, there is an openness and a willingness to really address and amend those problems.
Do you think the same openness and willingness, Tim, exists within the federal government, like on the House side of the government?
Yeah, I think, I think we have to wait and see. I do think I view it as kind of having a bit of political gamesmanship in part, and then some actually quite decent proposals for amendments. But I think, what people are missing in the politics of it, that the government's trying to do two things, frankly. It is trying to respond to court cases that have said these processes don't work and are inefficient and don't adequately provide consultation. So they've tried to provide something that can satisfy the courts so that we don't have to keep going back to the courts, so that maybe the process has a little longer, but at the end it's actually results in a decision. At the same time,
except it doesn't. That's the problem with Bill C-69. It doesn't lay out the actual.
Well, I actually read through the amendments, and actually the cap amendments are like they're proposing it change from shall consider to may consider, which is actually less clear. And so I think some of those amendments don't actually achieve them. I think, frankly, the degree to which there is an attempt to put some political oversight in the process is not to make it longer, but to actually make it, to make projects proceed more quickly, because frankly, we haven't been able to. So look, the point being of this is that people are going to have a debate. At the end, we're trying to balance between environmental and absolutely the necessity of getting this oil to markets, and trying to do that in a way that will survive court challenges, and also, frankly, to try and balance the double priorities that are out there. Like you saw today, there was an exemption by the government of certain in situ projects in Alberta, and Nature Canada screamed that it was flabbergasted at these with withdrawing its support of Bill C-69, which suggests that maybe the government's actually getting this right. So I think there is always technical amendments that make some sense as people look at bills and try to get it right. I think the overall political objective is the right one, which is to provide a process that provides a roadmap that the courts will sign off on so that we can get these projects done.
The balance that Tim brings up, Andrew, is sort of echoes what we've heard from the government for the last 3.5 years, right? They want to be able to grow the economy and protect the environment at the same time. If this bill is a litmus test for that, what does it say?
Well, this idea that somehow you can legislate with the wisdom of Solomon, I'm not sure is going to work. The reason that we've not seen pipelines built is because there's not been enough consultation done. And that is, now we're at a situation where the federal government in the last few months of its current mandate is trying to push through legislation to correct that. Maybe it's a good starting point, but there's going to have to be a lot of work done to make sure both the federal and provincial governments are on side, that there are not competing regimes at play here if we do want to restore investor confidence and restore the confidence of the communities who are going to be impacted by this, whether those are through surface rights or whether those are Indigenous communities. All of these groups need to have an avenue to participate in the consultation. And I think that's really been what the problem has been here, is that we've been waiting for years for really proper consultation to happen. It didn't happen under the Harper government, and there's not been a mechanism to restart those processes under the Trudeau government. So if this gets us to that point, then that may well mean that it'll be easier to build pipelines and do the environmental assessments in the future. Is this the perfect piece of legislation? I would argue probably not. Is it preferable to what we have? I'm not sure, because I really do think this can be accomplished in large part by simply making sure that the consultation processes are underway.
Jen, what do you think of the national unity argument that Jason Kenney made today? It kind of stuck out from his testimony before committee. I asked you, obviously, because you're in Alberta. He sort of talked about this idea that, if this were to happen in Quebec and more than 50% of the population were in support of separation, it would never happen in Quebec, essentially, was his argument. What did you think of that?
He's right. I mean, look, there isn't a very good argument for separation for Alberta. The financial and the geographical realities of this province do not make that a feasible option. However, there are certainly enough people to win a separation referendum at this point. The degree of discontentment and the sense that Ottawa continues to give this province a very unfair, very bad deal continues to persist and fester. And no good can come of national unity in that kind of environment. And in fact, the election of Jason Kenney with the mandate that he had was a real symptom of just how much discontent there was in this province and continues to be.
Melissa.
So, I think that if the federal government doesn't take some of the concerns around C-69 seriously and produce, a bill that the province of Alberta can get behind, things are only going to get darker and weirder from here.
The feds, Melissa, would say that discontent is, as it is directed towards them, isn't entirely based on a fair set of reasons, right? That they bought the pipeline, they have acknowledged there's a crisis there.
They certainly acknowledge some crisis, but the question is are they doing anything about it? And, in terms of this bill or frankly anything else that's happening with regards to the federal government and how they've treated Alberta in this, yes, there's cause for concern. But, talking about separation is never going to be the first step for a government like Jason Kenney's. Again, I agree with Jen, it's in nobody's interest. But it'll be interesting to see if that feeling sort of rises up, and it'll certainly be interesting to see what happens in October.
Look,
with the couple seats that they have left in Alberta.
Yeah, I want to be really clear. I think it's incredibly irresponsible of a premier of any of those Western provinces to be talking and stoking Western separatism. This is just absolutely a ridiculous approach
Is he stoking Western separatism,
Absolutely.
or is he finding a channel for Western separatism?
He is
separatism
stoking.
is there.
Sorry, no, that's not the case.
He's not making this up.
I'm sorry, that is not, in fact, what the case is. What is happening is there's a lot of frustration, always has been a lot of frustration in Western Canada about how the Federation is balanced. That manifests itself to a certain extent in this debate around separation. But that has always been a fringe conversation, and we need to make sure political leaders draw it back into that conversation.
I'm not sure that it's a fringe conversation.
Hold on, let's one at a time, guys, one at a time.
So let me just finish
You
the point.
finish, Andrew, and we'll move on, yeah.
Let me just finish the point on this. The piece that does need to get fixed with this is certainly making sure there's a clarity that the oil sector is an important part of Canada's economy. Being very clear that equalization needs to be reformed. By the way, I don't hear Andrew Scheer taking the same position on equalization. I hear Jason Kenney today. So where are the political leaders in pushing these pieces forward that are clearly going to help fix the fracture that's there? That's the piece that I think needs to be addressed, rather than this setting up a false confrontation between Alberta and Quebec.
And we have an example in the world of how irresponsible something like this can be. All you need to do is look at the United Kingdom. What David Cameron tried to do, speaking about a referendum around Brexit, he thought that was a political cure-all, and it is a disaster for the United Kingdom and continues to be a complete car wreck. So I think it's look, Jason Kenney has lots of tools to defend and advance Alberta's interests. He's a very skilled politician with lots of experience. Things like this, I think, are the wrong tool to reach for, with ramifications that are, I think, beyond the pale. I think Jason Kenney, at the end of the day, is too smart to reach into this toolbox.
Yeah, he knows.
And final word
I'm
to
sorry,
you.
I've been a pretty pointed critic of some of the tactics that Jason Kenney's pulling out of the toolbox, particularly the way that he's channeling a lot of the populist sentiment toward measures that I don't think will actually lead to anything useful, the equalization referendum being one of them. However, Jason Kenney is not saying do this or we'll separate. Jason Kenney is stating a reality of the sentiment that's actually on the ground in Alberta, and that is what Alberta elected him to do. So, you know, saying that it would be irresponsible for him to bring up the fact that we are entering a new era of Western alienation because of things like C-69, I think that that is overblown.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.